When you stop explaining, when you stop answering right away, when you stop playing the role they expect, the silence is deafening, not to you, to them. Suddenly, people who seemed stable begin to unravel. They poke, they say you've changed, they say you're acting strange. They ask, is everything okay? And at first you think, maybe I am being too distant. Maybe I am hurting them. Maybe this boundary is too harsh. But that's just the echo of your old conditioning. The voice of the persona you've worn for years. The mask that smiled, replied, and rescued even when your soul was screaming for silence. Carl Jung warned us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because when you begin that journey, others feel it. They may not know what to call it, but they feel the shift. And here's the truth. Your silence is a mirror. When you stop being emotionally accessible, you interrupt a cycle where others used you to avoid themselves. They didn't just need your company, they needed your reaction, your predictability, your emotional labor. You became their stabilizer, their escape, their validation source. And now that you've gone quiet, the reflection they once depended on is gone. And what's left is themselves, unfiltered, unvalidated, unmasked. And that terrifies them. Jordan Peterson once said, if you're not behaving like the person you were yesterday, people will attack you, because your change is a threat to their stability. That's not just metaphorical. Psychologically, we anchor ourselves to the roles others play. When someone suddenly sets a boundary, we feel but because we're forced to face our own emotional dependence, here's where the mirror comes in. When you become still, when you step out of emotional availability, you expose what was never love. Only reliance. Not admiration, but expectation. Think of that friend who only messages when they're heartbroken. That sibling who only visits when they need to vent. That colleague who calls you generous until you say no. You were never just you to them. You were a role, a function, a script they wrote, and you performed without realizing it. But now, the play has stopped. You've left the stage, and they're standing there waiting for their line, confused, hurt, maybe even angry, because your silence takes away their control of the narrative. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how to frame your absence. They don't know how to manipulate the energy if it is no longer being poured out automatically. Brown, in her research on vulnerability, said something deeply revealing. People will do almost anything to not feel pain, including causing pain to others. And that's what your withdrawal often reveals. Who was using your presence to hide from their own pain? So they'll guilt trip, they'll question you, they'll say, you're not the same. But here's the key. That discomfort isn't about you. It's about the emotional scaffolding that's collapsing around them now that you've chosen peace over people-pleasing. And this is where it gets tricky, because you'll be tempted to go back, to reply, explain, soothe, rescue. But ask yourself this. If your silence causes someone to panic, what does that say about how they were relating to you? Were they seeing you, or were they clinging to what you provided? In Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller, there's a powerful breakdown of anxious avoidant relationships. When one person becomes distant even in a healthy way, though other often intensifies pursuit. Why? Not because of love, but because of attachment, fear. Because unpredictability threatens the illusion of safety. So when someone chases you harder after you pull back, it's not always a sign of care. Sometimes, it's a sign of emotional addiction. And in that addiction, your silence feels like withdrawal. They don't miss your heart. They miss your reactions, your service, your sacrifice. And now that it's gone, they panic. But you are waking up. You're re-seeing how much of your life has been lived in response to other people's needs, moods, and manipulations. You're realizing how often you said yes just to avoid being seen as cold, selfish, or unreliable. And you're finally asking, what would happen if I didn't reply right away? What if I let them sit with the silence they've never had to face? What if I protected my energy like a sacred resource? Because it is. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more you protect your energy, the more magnetic it becomes. When you become less emotionally available, less predictably, don't lose value, you gain it. Robert Greene said it perfectly. Use absence to increase respect and honor, because what is always accessible is eventually ignored. But what is rare is revered. That's why monks withdraw into silence. Why mystics isolate to find truth. Why the strongest leaders often say the least. They've learned what you are now learning. Stillness is a weapon, a mirror, a shield, a sanctuary. And as you begin this journey, you will feel guilt. You will feel tempted to rush back in, to fill the silence. You will feel like you're abandoning people. But you're not abandoning them. You're abandoning the old youthful one who couldn't rest unless everyone else was okay. You're finally choosing to be still long enough to hear your own soul speak. And in that stillness, in that sacred pause, something profound happens. You begin to see who actually loved you and who just needed you. One is rooted in presence. The other is built on performance. Only one deserves your energy. So if you've gone still, if you've stopped reacting, if your silence has disrupted someone's comfort, it's okay. Because a mirror doesn't apologize for the reflection it reveals. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you said yes, even though you wanted to say no? When was the last time you answered a message while exhausted, smiled when your soul was drained, showed up for someone who never shows up for you? You might not know it, but you've been trained, programmed. Believe that your value lies in your availability. Always being there, always replying, always saying yes, always keeping the peace. But here's the hard truth. Availability is not the same as love. And if you're not careful, your chronic availability becomes your invisible cage. You become the emotional vending machine. People press a button and get what they want. Comfort, support, reassurance, validation. They walk away, not because you weren't enough, but because you were always there. Robert Greene warned us in the 48 Laws of Power. Too much circulation makes the price go down. The more you are seen and heard from, the more common you appear. And he's right. What is always available becomes background noise. What is always accessible becomes unappreciated. What is always giving becomes invisible. Let's call it what it is. Availability addiction. You're addicted to being needed, to being useful, to being the strong one, the reliable one, the selfless one. But under that addiction, there's a deeper truth, a darker one. You're afraid. Afraid that if you say no, they'll leave. Afraid that if you set a boundary, they'll call you selfish. Afraid that if you stop explaining, they'll stop loving. But ask yourself honestly, is it love if it disappears the moment you stop being convenient? Is it connection if it only thrives when you're overextending yourself? Mark Manson, in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a FCK, puts it bluntly. If you have to give too many FCKs, that's a sign you're giving them to the wrong people. This isn't about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about reclaiming your soul from the grip of unconscious servitude. You see, availability is not always generosity. Sometimes it's a symptom, a mask, a performance. Carl Jung called it the persona, the false self we build to be accepted, to be liked, to be seen as good. And it works. Until it doesn't, because every time you say yes when you want to say no, every time you suppress your exhaustion to meet someone else's expectation, every time you abandon your peace to soothe someone's panic, you disappear a little more, until all that is left is the shell of a person who exists only to serve other people as comfort. That's not virtue. That's self-erasure. Melody Beattie, one of the foremost voices on codependency, says, "We cannot give what we do not have, and we cannot keep giving without eventually running empty." And that's what you're feeling, isn't it? The tiredness, the quiet frustration, the emotional burnout. Do you think it's because you're not doing enough? But it's not that. It's that you're doing everything for everyone except yourself. You're treating your own energy like a public resource. But listen closely. Your energy is not a public park. It is not open 24/7. It is not free for anyone who wants to walk through it. It is sacred land. And if you don't protect it, people will trample it without a second thought. Let me remind you of something Carl Jung taught repeatedly. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you cannot become that person if your identity is built on pleasing everyone else. You cannot evolve if you're constantly shape-shifting to match someone else's needs. And you cannot experience peace while you're addicted to being needed. This addiction is subtle. It wears the mask of kindness. It pretends to be love. But love, real love, doesn't demand your constant availability. It doesn't guilt you for resting. It doesn't punish you for saying no. It doesn't disappear the moment you prioritize yourself. Jordan Peterson explains this in his work on personal boundaries. He says, if you're not willing to be a monster, you'll become prey. That doesn't mean being cruel. It means being capable of saying no more. It means recognizing when your kindness is being weaponized against you. It means having the strength to walk away even if they call you names for it. Because anyone who sees your boundaries as betrayal was never truly for you. They were for the version of you that said yes to everything. And that version of you, they're gone. Or at least, they're waking up. Now it's your turn to wake up fully. To see your people-pleasing for what it is. An old survival strategy. Something you learned as a child to avoid conflict, rejection, or abandonment. But you're not that child anymore. You're not living for approval. You're not living to be liked. You're living to be whole. And wholeness doesn't come from being everything to everyone. It comes from being true to yourself often, if that truth offends the ones who got used to your silence. So here's your challenge. Stop replying immediately. Stop over-explaining. Stop rescuing people from the discomfort of your boundaries. Stop performing availability. And start asking, who actually deserves access to me? Not just my time, but my emotions, my energy, my presence. Because from this day forward, you don't owe anyone your constant availability. You owe yourself your peace, your purpose, your presence, your truth, and those who can't respect that. Let them panic. That panic will teach them what your presence used to cover up. And it will teach you that the ones who truly value you won't need to chase you. They'll honor you because of your boundaries, not in spite of them. Imagine waking up each day with a full tank of fuel, psychic fuel, invisible, but real. Now ask yourself, where does it all go? By noon, you're already tired. By evening, you're emotionally drained. And by night, you're wondering why the simplest things feel so heavy. You didn't run a marathon. You didn't dig ditch, but you feel depleted, like your soul has been leaking all day. Because you've been spending your psychic energy, your most valuable currency, in things that don't feed you, only drain you. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed the human psyche wasn't just a mechanism for thoughts and feelings. It was an energy system. Every thought, every emotion, every reaction costs you something. There is no such thing as a neutral moment. Even small decisions, replying to a message you didn't want to answer, justifying yourself to someone who doesn't listen, overthinking a conversation that's already past, consume energy. Tiny leaks, moment by moment, until you're empty. Jung warned, that which we resist persists. And every time you resist your need for rest, for boundaries, for self-respect, you feed what depletes you. Psychic energy isn't infinite. It's like money. Spend it well, and you grow. Spend it mindlessly, and you collapse under invisible debts. David Hawkins, in Letting Go, describes it as the reservoir of our consciousness. The more we let go of attachments, reactions, and toxic emotional entanglements, the more energy we conserve, the more peace we experience. But modern life has taught us the opposite. You're expected to respond fast, to always be available, to prove your worth through endless emotional engagement. It's a trap. Think of how often you argue with someone who refuses to understand. Explain yourself to people who already made up their minds. Please, people who drain you. Mentally relive scenarios just to find the perfect comeback. Every one of those moments is a psychic transaction. But you're not being paid. You're being robbed. Silently, repeatedly, brutally. Mark Manson said it best. You only have so many F***CKS to give, so spend them wisely. And most of us don't. We spend them on guilt, fear, old roles, and we let emotional parasites, people, habits, and patterns feed off of us until there's nothing left for ourselves. Let me be even clearer. Psychic fatigue is real. It's the silent epidemic behind your burnout, anxiety, creative block, emotional numbness, and it's not caused by doing too much. It's caused by doing too much of what doesn't matter, especially emotionally. Cal Newport, author of Deep Work, warns about attention residue. When you switch from one interaction to another, without closure or purpose, your brain can't reset. You're dragging psychic clutter from conversation to conversation, and it leaves a mess in your head. Now think about your day. How many notifications did you check out of reflex? How many conversations did you engage in that felt obligatory? How many thoughts about other people's opinions took up your mental space? That's your psychic energy bleeding out, second by second. It's time to stop the hemorrhaging. Because here's the truth no one taught you. Your energy is the most precious resource you have. It is the currency of your attention, your focus, your emotional stability, and your future. And just like money, if you don't create a budget for it, someone else will spend it for you. Jung's whole philosophy of individuation, becoming your true self, is impossible without conserving psychic energy. You cannot build a solid identity when you're constantly exhausted. You cannot hear your intuition when the noise of everyone else's demands drowns it out. You cannot evolve while you're energetically broke. This is why monks practice silence, why artists disappear into solitude, why leaders often retreat to reflect before they act. Because power, real, sustainable power, requires energy discipline. And that means not responding to every emotional tug, choosing not to argue just to be right, saying no to preserve your peace, taking guiltless time alone to recharge your soul. It means knowing that not everything deserves your energy. So here's your audit. Start asking, did this interaction cost me or feed me? Did that conversation leave me lighter or heavier? Am I giving energy to something I truly value, or just reacting out of habit? Because your emotional bankruptcy isn't because you're weak. It's because you're too generous with what should be guarded like gold. Jordan Peterson, in his lectures on psychological order, puts it this way. If you don't know where you're going, you'll be used by people who do. The same applies to your energy. If you don't choose where it goes, it'll be hijacked by those who have no intention of giving anything back. And here's the secret they don't want you to realize. People can feel it. They can sense when you're reactive. They know when you're exhausted and still pushing. And if they're unconscious, opportunistic, or manipulative, they'll use it against you. But when you begin conserving, when your no becomes sacred, when your silence becomes strategic, when your presence becomes rare and intentional, you become powerful. Not because you dominate others, but because you finally stop abandoning yourself. Carl Jung believed that when you protect your energy, you become available to your true self, not just to the collective noise around you. So, the next time you feel drained, don't just blame your schedule, look deeper. Ask yourself, who or what is spending my soul without my consent? And then make the decision to pause, to unplug, to pull your energy back fully and unapologetically. Because that, my friend, is where your power has been hiding all along. Let's be honest, people-pleasing feels good. Until it doesn't, it feels noble, selfless, even holy. Tell yourself you're doing it for love, for peace, to keep things together. But beneath the surface, beneath the fake smiles and overextended commitments, something darker is hiding. Fear. Not just fear of confrontation, but fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear that without your usefulness, you will lose your place in the world. And this is where the lie begins. You think being nice keeps you safe. You think saying yes keeps people close. You think being endlessly available gives you value. But all it really does is make you a prisoner of everyone else's emotions. Carl Jung warned about this. He called it the inflation of the persona, where the mask becomes your identity. You show the world what they want to see. You become what they need. You say what they want to hear. And little by little, you disappear. Not physically, but spiritually, emotionally, energetically, until one day, you rise so far from your true self that you can tell the difference between your needs and their expectations. But here's the truth you were never told. People-pleasing is not kindness. It's a survival strategy. It's the behavior of someone who learned early on that love is conditional, that approval must be earned, that safety depends on how useful or agreeable you are. You became a master at reading rooms, anticipating needs, soothing tension before it even erupted. And maybe it worked. Maybe it got you praise, affection, even admiration. But inside, you became a stranger to yourself. Melody Beattie in Codependent, No More, describes this perfectly. Codependency is giving when it hurts, helping when it's not wanted, and sacrificing yourself so others can thrive. Does that sound like you? Giving even when it drains you, helping even when no one asked, saying, "I'm fine," when you're breaking inside. And why? Because control feels safer than vulnerability. Because you'd rather be needed than rejected. Because the illusion of being indispensable feels better than the fear of being forgotten, but this illusion is killing you. Robert Glover in No More Mr. Nice Guy says, "Nice guys are not nice. They are dishonest. They hide their needs. They seek approval, and they manipulate with kindness." That's the gut punch, isn't it? Because when you people please, you're not being honest, you're not being generous. You're negotiating silently, hoping that if you give enough, they'll finally give back. But they don't, because people don't respect doormats. They wipe their feet on them. People don't value endless yeses. They take them for granted. And the more you give to avoid rejection, the more rejection you quietly attract. It's not your kindness they're responding to. It's yourself. So ask yourself, why do I struggle to say no? Why do I explain myself even when I don't have to? Why do I feel guilty when I put myself first? The answer isn't because I'm too nice. It's because you're afraid. Afraid that without your utility, no one will choose you. Afraid that if you stop giving, you'll stop mattering. But here's what Carl Jung taught. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Your people-pleasing isn't fate. It's a pattern. And patterns can be broken. It starts by admitting that you're trying to control things through approval, through sacrifice, through performance. It's not evil. It's human, but it's time to grow out of it. Because love that must be earned is not love. It's a transaction. And any relationship that can't handle your truth, your boundaries, your fatigue, your silence is not a relationship. It's a performance contract. You were not born to be a mirror for other people's comfort. You were not born to be the peacekeeper in a war that drains your soul. You were born to become whole. And that begins by letting go of the illusion that your kindness guarantees security. In Radical Acceptance, Tara Brach says, "The boundary to what we can accept is the boundary to our freedom." And sometimes that means accepting this hard truth. Not everyone will like the real you, and that's okay. Because freedom isn't about being liked. It's about being yourself, even if it costs you admiration. Even if it costs you fake peace. Even if it costs you proximity to people who only loved the version of you that served them. Here's the challenge. Can you let someone be disappointed in you and not abandon yourself? Can you hold your no while they call you selfish? Can you stay silent while they project their frustration? If so, you're no longer a people pleaser. You're a sovereign being. Jordan Peterson says, "You cannot truly be good until you can also be dangerous." And that's what boundaries are. They're not cruelty, they're clarity. They're proof that you've stopped begging to be chosen and started choosing yourself. So if you feel the guilt rising, the panic tightening in your chest when you say no, when you pull back, when you disappoint, let it come. It's not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're detoxing from years of emotional dependency. You are not here to make everyone comfortable. You are here to become who you were always meant to be. And that journey, it begins where people-pleasing ends. Let's get real. Most of the power you've lost in life, you didn't lose it. You gave it away. And not with a grand decision, but in 100 little moments when you reacted instead of reflected. You flinched at a harsh word. You argued to prove your worth. You defended yourself to someone who never planned to understand you. You over-explained, emotional reactivity. It feels like power in the moment. You do something. You say something, you clap back. But in truth, you're not responding. You're relapsing into patterns that were programmed into you long before you knew what freedom was. Carl Jung knew this well. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So many of your emotional responses aren't choices. They're echoes of wounds. They're habits dressed up as urgency. You think you're defending your honor, but you're really just trying to silence your fear of not being enough. You think you're standing your ground, but you're really just afraid of being unseen, unheard, unloved. And in that fear, you lose control. Daniel Kahneman, in Thinking Fast and Slow, explains that most of what we call decisions are actually automatic. One, thinking fast, unconscious, emotional, reactive. We are machines of pattern, unless we stop, pause, observe, reflect. But the world doesn't teach you to reflect. It teaches you to react. Someone criticizes you, you respond instantly. Someone misunderstands you, you clarify. Someone disrespects you, you fight back. Someone triggers your insecurity, you chase validation. But what if your silence was stronger? What if your non-reaction was your greatest act of control? Because here's the truth. Every time you react impulsively, you spend psychic energy. And most of the time, for nothing. That argument you stayed up all night replaying in your head. That apology you gave just to smooth things over, even though you weren't wrong. That need to explain your intentions to people who already decided to misunderstand you. It costs you, not just emotionally, but spiritually, your peace, your clarity, your power, gone. And for what? Validation, revenge, the illusion of being right. That's the trap. Jung spoke about projection, how we unconsciously cast our own unresolved emotions onto others. But there's a second side to that coin. You also react to other people's projections as if they're real. And the moment you do that, you're not in your center anymore. You're in their story. David Hawkins, in Letting Go, describes this beautifully. He says that most people are emotional, pinballs bouncing from reaction to reaction, wondering why they're exhausted, never realizing that their energy leaks through unguarded emotions. Now think about it. How often have you lost sleep because you couldn't let something go? How often have you rehearsed imaginary conversations in your mind just to prepare for confrontations that never even happen? That's your energy draining into imaginary battles. And worst of all, when you react, you become predictable. And predictable people are easy to control. Someone knows they can trigger you with sarcasm. They'll use it. Someone knows you'll defend yourself when criticized. They'll criticize. Someone knows you hate being misunderstood. They'll twist your words. You think you're choosing your reaction, but you're just dancing to a song they're playing. Robert Greene, in The 48 Laws of Power, warns, anger and emotion are strategically counterproductive. The more emotionally reactive you are, the more control you give others. Let that land. Every time you react from woundedness, someone else gains power over your energy. And here's the part no one talks about. The most manipulative people in your life don't yell. They don't control you through dominance. They control you through your reactivity. They know your buttons. They know your wounds. They know exactly how to trigger your loyalty or defense mechanisms, your guilt. And once you respond, they own the moment. You're off balance. You're in their frame. But when you pause, when you stay silent, when you delay your response until you've centered yourself, you take the frame back, you reclaim the moment, you return to sovereignty. Because power is not in the noise. Power is in the space between the noise and your response. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, gave us the modern echo of this same wisdom. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So ask yourself, what would your life look like if you lived in that space? If you stopped reacting to every comment, every disappointment, every projection? What would happen if you gave yourself a 10-second pause before speaking? What would happen if you said nothing in moments when your ego wanted to scream? You wouldn't lose power, you'd gain it. You'd stop being a puppet and become a presence. Because people may not always understand silence, but they always feel power when it walks into a room. Carl Jung said, "The ability to remain silent and observe is a sign of psychic maturity." That's what we're building now. So here's your practice. Next time someone triggers you, pause. Don't rush to defend. Don't rush to fix. Don't rush to speak. Instead, ask, what part of me is reacting right now? Whose story am I stepping into? Do I need to respond? Or do I just need to breathe? Because the truth is simple. You don't owe anyone your reaction. You owe yourself your peace, your sovereignty, your mastery. And the day you stop being reactive is the day you stop being controlled. Let's start with a painful truth. Your kindness can be weaponized, not by accident, not occasionally, but deliberately by people who know exactly what they're doing. You think your empathy makes you strong, your loyalty makes you noble, your forgiveness makes you wise. And they do, in the right hands. But in the wrong hands, they make you a tool, a host for someone else's emotional survival. Carl Jung warned about this. He called it projection, the psychological defense mechanism where people cast their inner shadows onto others. But what happens when you receive that projection and act on it? You become the container for someone else's darkness. You become the stage for their controlled drama. You become the rescuer, the peacemaker, not because you chose it consciously, but because your reactivity made you the perfect character for their game. And you don't even realize it's a game, Because manipulators don't show up wearing masks and twirling mustaches, they show up needing your help. They show up wounded. They show up flattering you because they sense your need to be needed. And once they know how you work, they don't need to dominate you. They just need to trigger you. Robert Greene, in the 48 Laws of Power, said the best deceivers know that the easiest way to control someone is not to threaten them but to mirror their desires back at them. If you crave approval, they'll give it until you're hooked. If you crave peace, they'll give you chaos, then pull back, so you beg for relief. If you hate conflict, they'll exploit your silence as consent. This is how manipulators feed off the kind-hearted, not through violence, but through emotional dependency. They create loops of guilt, loyalty, and obligation until you start confusing their needs for your responsibility. You become the emotional caretaker, the permanent rescuer, the one who always understands. And here's the insidious part. You think you're choosing it, but you're not. You're reacting. Reacting to subtle shaming, reacting to the fear of being rejected, reacting to the image of yourself as the good one. But every time you react out of guilt, obligation, or emotional bait, you reinforce their control. Carl Jung wrote, "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism." And for many empaths, the narcotic is the ideal of being good, being loving, being the one who always shows up. But here's what Jung would ask you: at what cost? Because being kind at the expense of your sanity isn't kindness, it's compliance, it's unconscious servitude. And manipulators love unconscious kindness because it's predictable. Predictability gives them control. They know exactly how far they can push, exactly when to withdraw to make you chase, exactly how to phrase things to make you feel like the bad one when you set a boundary. You say, "I'm tired," and they say you're cold. You say, "I need space," and they say you're abandoning me. You say, "This hurts me," and they say you're too sensitive. And little by little, you shrink, you question your feelings. You walk on eggshells. You apologize for needs you never should have had to apologize for. This is not love. This is not friendship. This is not mutual. This is emotional parasitism. And the worst part, you play along because you think it's your fault. You think being stronger means taking it. You're thinking compassion means carrying both your pain and theirs. But Brown teaches us, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. And that's the real test. If your kindness destroys your own mental peace, it's not kindness anymore, it's codependence, it's fear. It's a silent form of self-betrayal. Now, here's what happens when you start waking up. You say no. You delay your reply. You stop explaining. You step back. And suddenly the mask falls. The same person who praised you for being so generous now says you've become selfish. The one who leaned on you emotionally now says you're not there anymore. The one who always needed your advice now says you've changed. You haven't changed. You've stopped playing their character. And manipulators hate that because they weren't relating to you. They were relating to the role you played in their script. Jordan Peterson calls this the tyranny of the weak. The people who appear helpless but use guilt, shame, and emotional collapse to control others. They weaponize their fragility. They outsource their emotional regulation. And if you've been a strong one your whole life, you're a prime target because you're used to cleaning up emotional messes. You're used to fixing. You're used to being responsible for everyone. But it's time to drop the mop. You are not a cleanup crew for someone else's dysfunction. Your empathy is a gift. Your sensitivity is sacred. Your desire to help is beautiful. But only when it's conscious. Only when it's balanced. Only when it doesn't require the death of your own spirit. So here's what Carl Jung would challenge you to do. Look at the dynamics in your life. Ask who only calls me when they need something. Who guilt trips me when I set a boundary. Who becomes cold or angry when I stop performing availability. These aren't just people. These are patterns. And those patterns exist because your unguarded kindness makes you easy to manage. But when you stop reacting, when you stop explaining, when you stop showing up out of obligation, the game ends. And here's the final twist. When you stop being useful, you'll discover who really valued you. Because if your absence ruins the relationship, it was never a relationship. It was a contract based on emotional labor. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And that's what your silence, your withdrawal, your boundaries force them to do, face themselves. And most people aren't ready for that. But you are. There's a power so subtle, so misunderstood, so feared, that most people run from it their entire lives. It's not force. It's not dominance. It's not charisma. It's silence. Not the silence of avoidance. Not the silence of passivity, but the strategic, deliberate, conscious silence, the kind that unsettles the insecure and recenters the awakened. Carl Jung didn't see silence as emptiness. He saw it as a womb, a sacred container where the soul rearranges itself. A space not of absence but of presence intensified. Because when you stop reacting, when you stop speaking, when you stop feeding the noise, everything is revealed. Silence shows you who can sit with themselves and who needs your reaction to avoid their own reflection. It's why manipulators panic when you go quiet. Why toxic people provoke you harder when you don't respond. Why unstable relationships start unraveling the moment you stop explaining, because your silence takes away their script. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how to spin the narrative. They don't know how to control the emotional rhythm anymore. In that absence, the mask falls, and what's exposed is the raw, chaotic truth they've been avoiding. This is why Lao Tzu said, "Silence is a source of great strength." And Marcus Aurelius reminded us, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Because your silence is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's the refusal to play a game designed to keep you reactive, emotional, and drained. Let me tell you something. The loudest voice rarely wins. The most reactive person rarely leads. The one who always explains himself never holds the power. But the one who pauses, the one who waits, the one who listens first and speaks last, they own the frame. Robert Greene teaches this in the 48 Laws of Power. Always say less than necessary. The more you say, the more common you appear, and the more likely you are to say something foolish. Silence creates mystery. Mystery creates power. And true quiet power isn't in having the last word. It's in knowing you don't need one. Let's make this practical. Someone insults you, you don't respond. You observe. Someone misrepresents you. You don't scramble to defend. You hold your posture. Someone withdraws to manipulate you. You don't chase, you allow. Because the moment you stay calm in chaos, the game ends. Why? Because silence changes the rules. When everyone expects a reaction and you give none, they have to face themselves. They have to sit in the discomfort of not being able to control your emotions. And most people can't do that. They want your reactivity because it lets them escape their own. Silence, then, is a mirror one that reflects not only what's been said, but what's been avoided. And what does it take to wield silence? Emotional discipline. The kind few people have in a world that rewards speed, opinion, and instant gratification. We live in a culture that confuses constant talking with intelligence, constant replying with relevance, constant exposure with value. But that's all noise. And noise doesn't command respect. Presence does. Cal Newport, in Deep Work, explains that the ability to enter focused, silent, undistracted states is now a superpower. Because in silence, you build clarity. In silence, you access your intuition. In silence, you realize how much energy you've been wasting on meaningless conflict. And here's what they don't want you to know. Most arguments don't need to be won. They need to be walked away from. Most criticisms don't need rebuttals. Most conversations don't need more words. They need more space. Jordan Peterson once said, "Don't interrupt your enemies when they're making a mistake." And sometimes, that enemy is your own ego trying to prove a point that doesn't matter to a person who doesn't care, for validation that doesn't last. That's why silence isn't just emotional restraint. It's spiritual sovereignty. It's your refusal to let the outside world decide the state of your inner world. It's how you reclaim your psychic energy, how you rebuild your nervous system, how you protect your peace from emotional vampires. But here's the paradox. Silence won't make you popular. It'll make you threatening. Because your quiet will trigger people used to controlling you. Your boundaries will feel like betrayal to those who benefited from your silence before it was conscious. Your absence will be labeled cold, rude, or changed. But that discomfort is not yours to carry, it's theirs. Let them sit in the echo. Let them fill in the blanks. Let them feel the loss of access. Because if your silence unsettles someone, that means they were addicted to your presence in ways you hadn't realized. And that's not love. That's dependency. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when only you transform? The reaction stops. You step into stillness, into authority, into a version of yourself that doesn't need to prove, perform, or persuade. You just are. And that is where the real you emerges. So let this be a mantra. I don't respond to bait. I don't bleed for attention. I don't fight battles that cost my peace. I respond only when I choose. And I choose silence when silence protects my soul. Because silence isn't absence. It's presence. It's the space in which power regenerates. And it's the beginning of everything sacred. There's a silence so deep, a space so quiet, that when you enter it, you begin to hear something you've never heard before. Yourself. Not the version of you that the world applauds. Not the version others demand. Not the version performing for love, approval, or peace. But the real you buried under years of noise, obligation, and masks. And the only way to find that version is to walk into solitude. Not loneliness. Solitude, there's a difference. Loneliness is the ache of disconnection from others. Solitude is the healing of reconnection with self. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the sacred path of becoming whole. It doesn't happen in crowds. It doesn't happen in the applause. It doesn't happen when you're performing. It happens when you're alone. In the stillness. In the quiet after rupture. In the space left behind when you finally stop chasing roles, titles, and acceptance. It's in this space that you begin to rebuild. Not a better persona, but a more integrated soul. But here's the hard part. The path to individuation requires separation. You must, at some point, leave the collective, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. You must learn to disidentify from the false self, the self that was shaped by survival, by people-pleasing, by trauma, by the need to belong. In Women Who Run with the Wolves, Clarissa Pinkola writes, "To be ourselves causes us to be exiled by many others, and yet to comply with what others want causes us to be exiled from ourselves." Read that again. You can either be rejected by them or be rejected by yourself. That's the choice. And solitude is what helps you make the right one. But solitude isn't always peaceful at first. At first, it hurts. You'll feel the emptiness of the room. You'll feel the ghost of those who only loved you when you were accessible. You'll feel the guilt of walking away from dynamics that once defined you. You'll even feel like you're dying. Because in a way, you are. The old self is dying. The false self. The compulsively kind, endlessly reactive, over-explaining self. And that death is sacred. It is the fire that forges something new, something indestructible. Carl Jung said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." And you cannot integrate what you haven't sat with. You cannot confront your fear of being alone if you never allow yourself to be. You cannot reclaim your energy if it's always scattered across conversations, obligations, and relationships built on duty instead of authenticity. Solitude is the container that gathers your fragments. It's the sacred ground where your scattered self begins to return. But modern culture fears solitude. It sells you distraction. It tells you being alone is failure, that silence is a void, that if no one's texting, no one cares. It's a lie. Some of the most profound awakenings in history, religious, philosophical, artistic, happened in solitude. Jesus withdrew to the wilderness before his ministry. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree in silence until enlightenment. Jung himself retreated from public life to confront his own psyche, sketching out the Red Book from the depths of solitude. Because here's the truth. Solitude is not retreat. It is return. Return to self. Return to Senna. Return to the voice you drowned out for years trying to be everything to everyone. In stillness is the key. Ryan Holiday reminds us. Stillness is what aims the archer's arrow. It inspires new ideas. It sharpens perspective. It allows for the formation of character. You cannot become who you were meant to be if you never pause long enough to meet her. And yes, solitude will strip you. It will take away the applause, the validation, the relationships built on obligation. But what it gives you in return is clarity, conviction, and connection to something far deeper than the noise of modern life. Because when the world falls away, you discover what was never you to begin with. You begin to ask, what do I value? What do I want apart from anyone else's desires? Who am I when no one is watching? And that is the beginning of authentic power. A power rooted not in control or charisma, but in alignment. In solitude, you realize you don't have to chase love. You don't have to beg to be seen. You don't have to be accessible to be worthy. You are already whole. But wholeness only reveals itself in the silence of separation. So if you find yourself walking alone, if you're in the quiet after leaving old roles, relationships, or realities, don't run back. Don't fill the void with noise. Don't mistake sacred solitude for failure. Stay, sit, breathe, listen. You are not lost. You are returning. And soon, very soon, something inside you will rise. Not the old self, but the integrated self. The self no longer run by fear, no longer obsessed with approval, no longer drained by chaos. The self that holds boundaries without guilt, that speaks when necessary, and walks in silence full of power. Because individuation is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And the path back to that memory begins in sacred solitude. Freedom is not something you stumble upon. It's not a one-time breakthrough. It's not found in a single journal entry, meditation, or moment of clarity. Freedom is built slowly, deliberately, through the daily discipline of managing your emotions like sacred fire. This is what most people miss. They want the peace of the monk without the practice of silence, the strength of the stoic without the power of the sovereign without the pain of self. But true transformation isn't poetic. It's practical, and it begins with this truth. Your emotions are not in charge. You are. You may not control what arises, but you absolutely control what you entertain, feed, and act on. And that is where discipline begins. Carl Jung warned us about unconscious emotion. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But fate is not destiny. It's just default. And default mode is emotional chaos, reacting, defending, justifying, chasing, collapsing. So what is the alternative? Emotional discipline. Not repression, not denial, but it's what the Stoics practiced, what the mystics lived, what modern psychology now calls emotional regulation, the capacity to observe your emotions without being owned by them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this, you have the power to revoke at any moment. Think about that. Your power isn't in controlling what happens. Your power is in how you interpret, hold, and respond to it. And this is a daily practice. Someone disrespects you. Pause, breathe. Respond only when you're grounded. You feel the urge to notice it, don't indulge it. Let the silence do the talking. You sense the familiar guilt creeping in when you say no. Welcome it. Let it pass. Don't negotiate with it. These micro moments are where your future is being shaped. Because every time you don't react from your wound, every time you don't abandon yourself to soothe someone else, every time you don't compromise your boundary just to keep the peace, you're building inner freedom. And freedom is not the absence of difficulty. It's the presence of mastery. Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL and leadership coach, has a phrase burned into his ethos. Discipline equals freedom. Because if you don't discipline your emotions will discipline you through regret, anxiety, burnout, and broken relationships. The cost of emotional impulsivity is steep. One poorly timed outburst can damage trust. One defensive comment can shatter peace. One guilt-driven yes can derail your entire week. This is why emotional discipline is not optional, it's foundational. It's what allows you to protect your energy without guilt, enforce your boundaries without drama, choose your responses instead of being dragged by reactions. It's the quiet strength that builds empires, stabilizes relationships, and forges character. But here's the paradox. Emotional discipline is rarely visible. No one sees the moment you bite your tongue. No one applauds when you walk away instead of argue. No one throws a parade when you delay your reply for the sake of clarity. But your nervous system knows, your soul knows, your future knows. And over time, that internal peace becomes external power. In Essentialism, Greg McKeown says, if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. That applies to your emotional life as well. If you don't set internal boundaries, people will cross them. If you don't train your attention, distractions will steal it. If you don't govern your feelings, others will manipulate them. So here's what emotional discipline looks like in real life. Pause before responding, especially when triggered. Name the emotion. This is anger. This is shame. This is fear. Ask if it's true. Is this mine or someone else's projection? Delay action. I don't need to solve this right now. Choose from alignment, not urgency. And the more you do this, the more you practice small acts of inner control, the more unshakable you become. Think about it. Most people lose entire days to a single bad message. They spiral for hours because someone didn't reply. They alter their energy based on who's paying attention. That is slavery. Emotional slavery. But you're training for something else. You're training for freedom. The kind no one can take away. The kind that doesn't come from changing your environment, but from mastering your internal response to it. Carl Jung believed that every step toward wholeness required consciousness, not perfection, not performance, just honest awareness, followed by deliberate choice. And that's what emotional discipline is. It's not being robotic. It's not suppressing your humanity. It's leading yourself, especially when your emotions try to lead you astray. So let's make this practical. It starts simple. Wait 10 seconds before replying when triggered. Take 3 deep breaths before responding to criticism. Use silence as a sacred filter. Only speak when your words are aligned. And remember, you are not your emotions. You are the witness, the guardian, the gatekeeper. And when you learn to master your emotional gate, you stop letting chaos walk in without invitation. That's freedom, not a moment, but a muscle. And it's one you're building right now. It's why choice. So let this be a reminder. You don't have to respond to prove your power. You don't have to react to protect your dignity. You don't have to explain to earn peace. You just have to choose deliberately, daily, decisively. Because emotional discipline isn't about who you are today. It's about who you're becoming. And the more you master your response, the more you master your reality. There's something strange that happens when you stop explaining yourself. At first, people get uncomfortable. They press harder. They ask why you're being dissonant, different, or difficult. But then something else begins to happen. They start respecting you. Because silence has a gravity to it. It says what words never can. I owe you nothing but my truth. You've spent most of your life explaining, haven't you? Explaining why you're not available. Explaining why you're setting a boundary. Explaining why you said no. Explaining why you need space, need time, need silence. And here's the painful truth. Every time you explain your right to be sovereign, you unconsciously give others permission to question it. Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But how can you become that if you're constantly reshaping yourself to be understood? You weren't born to be legible to everyone. You weren't born to be a character in someone else's narrative. You were born to be whole, not palatable. And that wholeness begins where your need to explain ends. When you stop explaining, you're not being rude. You're reclaiming your time. You're conserving your energy. You're saying, I trust my inner world more than I trust your approval. It's an act of spiritual maturity. In No More Mr. Nice Guy, Dr. Robert Glover calls this the nice guy syndrome, the chronic need to be liked, understood, and approved of. Nice guys explain themselves constantly not to communicate, but to protect themselves from perceived rejection. But here's the thing. Explanations are a form of emotional armor. You don't just want to be heard, you want to be protected from judgment. But that protection comes at a cost. You're draining yourself with words meant to soften the blow of your truth. You're giving others the illusion that your choices are up for debate. You're trading your inner authority for momentary validation. And that is a price too high. Mark Manson writes, in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a FCK*, the desire for more positive experience is itself a negative experience. And paradoxically, the acceptance of one's negative experience is itself a positive experience. In other words, when you stop trying to control how others perceive you, you gain real control over your inner world. Because here's what happens when you stop explaining. People start to notice your self-trust. They feel it. It's in the pause, in the way you say no, thank you, and don't fill the silence, in the way you walk away without apology, in the way you hold your boundary without broadcasting a justification. And suddenly you're not a doormat. You're a mystery, and mystery commands respect. Robert Greene, again, drives this home. Always say less than necessary. The more you say, the more common you appear. Excessive words dilute power. Silence distills it, because explanation often comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of rejection, fear of looking cold or uncaring. But the irony is this: the more you explain, the less people hear you. The more you justify, the less seriously they take your choices. The more you try to make your boundaries acceptable, the more likely they are to be negotiated. Why? Because when you explain too much, you communicate uncertainty. But when you speak with clarity and stop there, people lean in. They adjust. And if they don't, let them go. Because if someone needs you to explain your right to peace, they were never safe for your peace in the first place. Brown teaches us this in Daring Greatly. You don't have to belong everywhere. You only need to belong to yourself. When you belong to yourself, your silence becomes enough. You stop editing your life to fit their expectations. You stop seeking closure from people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop narrating your every move like you owe the world a commentary track on your decisions. This is what emotional adulthood looks like. You do what aligns and let the chips fall. You say what's true and trust that truth to stand on its own. You draw a boundary and walk away without watching who follows. And here's the reward. You become untouchable, not because you're distant, but because you're grounded. You are no longer seeking permission to be yourself. You are being yourself, without an explanation, without a footnote, without a disclaimer. Because the deeper you walk into wholeness, the less you explain, the more rooted you become, the fewer people you need to convince. Carl Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Explaining is an outward gaze. It says, I need you to get it, so I can feel okay. But awakening says, I'm already okay, even if you never get it. So here's your practice now. Let your choices speak. Let your peace be the answer. Let your silence set the tone. You don't need to explain your evil. You don't need to narrate your healing. You don't need to translate your boundaries. Those who are meant to understand you will feel it. And those who don't, let them misunderstand. Because the moment you stop over-explaining, you stop shrinking. And the moment you stop shrinking, you start being respected. There is a kind of silence that isn't empty, a kind of distance that isn't loneliness, a kind of isolation that doesn't break you, it builds you. It's called sacred isolation. And that's the path every awakened soul must walk if they are ever going to move from self-betrayal to self-respect. But let's be honest, at first it feels like abandonment, like something inside you is dying, because it is the part of you that needed constant closeness, that feared being misunderstood, that clung to approval, that stayed in rooms long after your peace had left. That version of you, the one who abandoned herself just to belong, is fading, and in its place, something stronger is emerging. Carl Jung said, man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health. But he wasn't glorifying pain. He was pointing to transformation and how it's almost always born in solitude. Because real growth doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens when you've walked away from everything you once clung to, relationships, roles, reputations, and you begin asking, who am I without the applause? Who am I without the validation? Who am I when I stop performing? You see, most of us don't fear being alone. We fear what will emerge in the silence. The grief we bury, the rage we suppressed, the truth we silenced just to be loved. And so we stay busy. We stay reactive. We stay connected to people who drain us, just so we don't have to sit with our own unmet needs. But eventually, the cost becomes too high. You hit a wall, you burn out, you break down, and the universe whispers it's time to go inward, time to return to yourself, time to stop betraying your needs just to preserve appearances. This is the essence of sacred isolation. It is not exile, it's initiation. You are not being punished, you're being prepared. And the preparation begins when you realize you've been betraying yourself to keep other people comfortable. You've said yes when you meant no. You've tolerated disrespect because you were afraid of being alone. You've silenced your truth because you didn't want to be called difficult. You've kept explaining, fixing, overcompensating because your self-worth was tied to how good you could be for others. But that is over now, because you've reached the edge, and the only way forward is inward. In the mountain is you, Brené Brown writes. Your new life is going to cost you your old one. That includes your old relationships, your old responses, your old addictions to being needed. And yes, it will be lonely at first. You will lose people. You will be misunderstood. You will question whether you're doing the right thing. But let me be very clear. Choosing yourself for the first time always feels like betrayal, because you were trained to betray yourself. You were raised to believe that love is earned, that self-sacrifice is noble, that availability equals virtue. But sacred isolation shows you the truth, that your energy is not a charity, that your worth doesn't come from usefulness, that your voice matters even when it makes others uncomfortable. And when you sit in that silence long enough, a shift happens. You stop reaching for the phone. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop waiting for the world to give you permission to rest, to speak, to take up space. You begin to trust your own rhythms. You begin to honor your own intuition. You begin to recognize that being alone doesn't mean being unloved. It means being unhooked. Unhooked from codependency, unhooked from manipulation, unhooked from the guilt that kept you small. Because here's the paradox. The deeper you go into sacred isolation, the more whole you become. You stop fragmenting yourself to be palatable. You stop bending your boundaries to avoid rejection. You stop chasing connection that costs your sanity. And from that wholeness emerges self-respect, not the kind that needs to be loud, not the kind that needs to be seen, but the kind that allows you to sit in silence without shrinking, the kind that lets you walk away without anger, the kind that says, I don't need to be understood to be at peace. Carl Jung believed that the process of individuation, the journey to truth, you to break away from the collective. He wrote, the first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego. The second half is going inward and letting go of it. That's what sacred isolation is. The letting go of everything that's not real, everything that's not yours, everything that was created from fear. It's the journey into the cave you were always afraid to enter. And yes, it's dark in there, but that's where your fire is. That's where your sovereignty begins. So if you're in a season of isolation, don't rush to fill the silence. Don't call it depression when it might be transformation. Instead, breathe and listen. There is a deeper self waiting for you beneath all the noise. A self that doesn't need approval to feel whole. A self that knows when to speak and when to walk away. A self that has stopped betraying their soul to avoid discomfort. That self is rising, and it rises first. In sacred isolation, there's a path that only a few ever walk. It's narrow, uncrowded, quiet, and most people avoid it not because it's hidden but because it's lonely. It's the path of the rare, the path of those who no longer abandon themselves to fit in, the path of the ones who are not just healing but evolving. It's called the solitude of the strong. And here's the paradox. The stronger you become, the more alone you'll feel at first. Not because something is wrong, but because most of the world is addicted to noise, validation, and attachment. And you've stopped chasing those things. You've stopped explaining yourself. You've stopped leaking energy. You've stopped being available to anyone who didn't treat your presence with reverence. And in return, you've got silence. You got empty rooms, you got missed calls, you got distance where there used to be demand. It hurts, doesn't it? That ache of being forgotten by those who once pulled at your every thread. But let me tell you something no one says out loud. This is the sign you're ascending, not spiritually bypassing, not hiding, but detaching from systems, relationships, and patterns that were always keeping you small. Carl Jung wrote, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. And isn't that what you've felt? The slow death of connection with people who never really saw you. The ache of surface-level conversations while your soul begged for depth. The silent question, am I the only one who feels this deeply? You're not, but you are one of the few who chose to listen to that feeling. And that's why the path narrowed. Because when you stop performing your personality, when you stop shrinking to be digestible, when you stop bending for comfort, you outgrow most rooms. Not out of ego, but out of alignment. You no longer resonate with chaos, with gossip, with the emotional games that once kept you feeling significant. You crave peace more than people-pleasing, truth more than comfort, depth more than attention. And that craving makes you a threat, because when you stop being predictable, when you stop being emotionally available on command, when you stop being the fixer, the pleaser, the giver without boundaries, you stop being useful to people who never truly valued you. They wanted the mask, not the soul behind it. And now that the mask has been removed, you stand alone, unapologetically, unmasked, unmoved. Nietzsche once wrote, the higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. This is the solitude of the strong. It's not about being better. It's about being willing to carry the weight of your own evil. even when it means letting go of connections that only survived because you never said no, even when it means choosing peace over company, truth over comfort, growth over inclusion. And yes, it gets lonely. You'll miss the noise sometimes. You'll miss the version of you that everyone liked. You'll even question your own sanity. But this is where your power is forged, because the solitude of the strong isn't punishment, it's protection. It's the sacred space where your next self is being shaped, the version of you that doesn't second-guess your boundaries, the version that speaks with precision, not panic, the version that chooses stillness over struggle, purpose over popularity. In quiet, Susan Cain writes, there's zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. The same is true of connection. There's zero correlation between being constantly surrounded and being truly seen. You don't need more people around you. You need the right ones. People who see your solitude not as a threat, but as a mark of wisdom. People who don't punish your boundaries, but honor them. People who know how to sit in silence with you and still feel close. But before you can receive those souls, you must become the kind of soul who can hold space for herself. The kind of soul who can sit in a quiet room and feel home, not abandonment. The kind of soul who no longer measures worth by how many people text back. Because you're not seeking attention anymore, you're seeking truth. And truth is a lonely road, until it's not. Until it leads you to a life so aligned that you no longer crave what once kept you broken. So if you feel alone right now, let me remind you, you are not broken. You are not behind. You are not unloved. You are just walking a higher path. And higher paths are narrow. They're quiet, but they're yours. And at the end of that path, you'll find others who've walked it too. You'll recognize them by the way they don't demand explanation, by the peace in their eyes, by the way they respect your presence and never try to consume it. Because those who've walked through sacred solitude never forget the weight of it and never take your light for granted. So keep walking, even if it's silent, even if it's lonely, because this isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning of your sovereignty. And those who are meant for you, they'll meet you at the summit, not at the starting line. There comes a moment in every journey of awakening when the deepest choice must be made, not between good and bad, not between right and wrong, but between peace and people. Not because people are bad, but because for most of your life you've chosen them over yourself. You've chosen to keep the peace externally, while letting chaos reign inside you. You've said yes when you were falling apart. You've stayed quiet to keep the room calm. You've made everyone else comfortable while betraying your own needs. And now finally you're being asked to choose differently. This is the final challenge. And make no mistake, it will feel like loss. Because choosing peace means walking away from conversations you used to fight to be part of, letting people misunderstand you without rushing to fix it, saying no, not just when it's easy but when it's necessary, and in relationships that were rooted in your self-abandonment. Carl Jung said, we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. And often, the disguise looks like someone you love, someone you admire, someone who represents who you used to be, and you have to let them go. Because when you evolve, when you heal, your nervous system begins to reject anything that once felt normal, but was actually harmful. Your body says, no more. Your spirit says, not again. Your heart says, I choose peace. But here's the cost. You won't be celebrated for it, not at first. You'll be called distant, cold, unrecognizable. People will say, you've changed, and you have, because peace changes you. It softens your edges but sharpens your boundaries. It makes you quieter but more powerful. It makes you less reactive but more convicted. You're no longer willing to negotiate with your intuition. You're no longer willing to trade your sanity for connection. You're no longer addicted to being seen, praised, or needed, because you've tasted something better. Silence over noise, stillness over chaos, solitude over fake connection, truth over comfort, peace over people. Not all people, but the ones who only loved you when you were accessible, when you were soft-spoken, when you stayed small enough to fit into their expectations. This is where the loneliness comes, because when you choose peace, you stop playing the emotional games most people don't even know they're playing. You no longer rescue people who refuse to rescue themselves, apologize for resting, explain your boundaries, carry conversations that are rooted in guilt or performance, and suddenly you're too much or not enough or different. But that's not rejection, that's realignment. You're not being pushed away. You're being positioned into a life that honors who you truly are. The rupture is real. And yes, it will hurt. The guilt will claw at you. The old roles will whisper, go back, be nice, keep the peace. But you've outgrown nice, you've outgrown polite performance, you've outgrown living in reaction to other people's emotions. Because now, your compass is internal. Now, you ask, does this drain or nourish me? Am I shrinking to be here? Is this a genuine connection or just an old pattern? And you answer honestly, even when it costs you company. Jordan Peterson once said, to stand up straight with your shoulders back means willingly to undertake the burden of being. And part of being truly being means losing what was never meant to last, beyond your unhealed version. So yes, The final challenge is the hardest, because peace costs everything that was built on your compliance, but it gives you something worth more than gold. Sovereignty. You walk into rooms with presence, not explanation. You make decisions from clarity, not guilt. You love from fullness, not obligation. And you're not lonely anymore, because you're finally with yourself. No more negotiating your worth. No more giving without reciprocity. No more trying to earn what should be freely given. In Radical Acceptance, Tara Brach says, the boundary to what we can accept is the boundary to our freedom. And when you accept that some people can't go with you, you're free. Free to rest, free to breathe, free to exist without a script. And you'll be surprised who shows up in that space. New people, aligned people, people who love your silence, your strength, your boundaries. But first you have to walk through this fire. The fire of guilt, the fire of being misunderstood, the fire of letting go. Let it burn. Let it refine you. Let it remind you that peace is not a passive state. It is a conscious, courageous, daily choice. So ask yourself now, am I willing to be disliked for the sake of my alignment? Am I willing to be misunderstood for the sake of my freedom? Am I willing to lose people to find myself? Because that is the final challenge, and when you pass it, you don't just have peace, you become it.